The state has 4 constitutional offices you get to vote for. Of course, the governor, the AG, Secretary of State, and then treasurer. This guy wants to be your treasurer, Lang Sias, which I'm not even certain is a name. Lang, welcome.
Thanks very much, John. Good to be here.
Is that like a country singer's name? What?
It is a one-off. It is
a
a one-off, yes. Sias used to be French. It was S-I-E-Y-E-S, and Lang was a surname in my mom's family that they resurrected for me.
A surname?
It was actually Langhorne, L-A-N-G-H-O-R-N-A, and I dropped the horn for reasons you can well understand.
Wait a minute, is your given name Langhorne?
It is.
Why the hell would you drop Langhorne? That is a kick-ass name.
I had a lot of fights on the school bus.
But, I mean, yeah, you and I are probably of the generation of Leghorn, Foghorn, or whatever.
Foghorn, Leghorn.
Foghorn, yes. Leghorn,
That's
who was
right.
modeled after LBJ, by the way. But kids
I did not know that.
Yeah, kids today don't know about that. Bring it back. Dude, be true to yourself.
I'm sticking with Lang at this point.
All right. You don't want to impress women. That's your problem. All right. You've been a state rep for a long time, and then you stopped being a state rep so you could run for lieutenant governor a few years back. So before we get into running for treasurer, let's just talk about that.
Sure.
How long were you a state rep, and for whom?
I was a state rep from 2015 until right at the beginning of 2019, representing a House district in Jefferson County in Arvada. I think Arvada west of Wadsworth was the district I represented.
That wasn't too long. Why did you stop? You couldn't run for lieutenant governor and re-up for that?
That's correct. When Walker asked me to join his ticket and be his running mate, and I said yes, I could not run at the same time for lieutenant governor and to be reelected to the state legislature.
By law or just by
Yes,
ethics?
we went to the Secretary of State's office and just confirmed, but that's what we needed to do.
I remember Lloyd Benson ran as vice president on Dukakis's ticket. Yeah, I'm old. And he also ran for Texas senator.
Yep, he could do that. You couldn't do that in Colorado.
If you had to do it over again, would you have taken up the offer?
Yes.
To run for lieutenant governor?
Yes, I had a lot of respect for Walker, including the work that he had done with PARA, which I'm sure we'll talk more about. And I thought he would have been a good governor and a fiscally responsible one. So yes, I was honored to be picked.
Yeah, but you lost.
That happens.
It was all your fault, is what I heard. I talked to Walker. He said if he had a different running mate,
He'd pick someone else in a heartbeat.
Anybody. Walker was also state treasurer. This is the seat you are looking for. One of the things Walker did, I thought pretty ably, was to get people to think about the Public Employees Retirement Association, PARA, and its pensions. You told me off air, the intersection of really important and really boring. Perfect. So let's just dive into it right now.
Sure.
If you become state treasurer, what does that got to do with the state's pension plan, and who cares?
Well, the state treasurer actually has a seat on the board of PARA, so that there's a very direct involvement there.
How many people on the board?
There are 16, but 15 of them are voting members. 11 of them elected by various divisions, various segments of PARA members. 3 appointed by the governor, and then the state treasurer. So the state treasurer is, there as a representative of the taxpayers and of the public. Everybody on that board has a fiduciary duty to the members. As to why people should care, 3 reasons. One is there are over 600,000 PARA members out there who are counting on this for retirement.
How many again?
A little over 600,000 members.
Wow.
It's a lot. It's a lot of
When you
folks
say
in
members,
our state.
how many of those are retired?
It's 100. I don't have the exact number in my brain. It's probably about 140, 120, 25 to 150,000.
Overwhelmingly, those who are going to be getting money out of the system aren't taking it yet. So this is very front-loaded.
That varies over time. But there were 600,000 plus members overall in various divisions. 2, the taxpayers put a lot of money into this. in various ways, which we can talk about in more detail. And three, when a business is thinking about coming to Colorado or any place else, one of the things that's on their site survey checklist is what's the status of your state's pension fund?
Why do they care about that?
They care about that because they look at unfunded liabilities of a state pension fund as their future tax liabilities. So this has a huge direct and indirect impact on what happens in Colorado's economy. And it's one of the reasons that so many of our chambers of commerce, for example, are interested in the pension fund being on a very solid foundation.
Let me tell you why I care about this stuff.
Okay.
Because it's so unfair. And it's unfair in numerous ways. I know there's a lot of divides in America.
Sure.
Rural versus urban, left versus right, Trumpies versus, whatever. I think underlying that are people who are going to retire early with government guaranteed luxurious pensions. And those of us who will have to be working until we die in order to pay taxes to support them while they're retired. And while people don't quite get this now, I think it's going to become more and more obvious. In Colorado, you can retire, I believe, at 57 years old and receive full para benefits. I could be retired now. And I've got to tell you, I've tried to put aside money. There's no way I'm in close to being able to be retired. Most people are not close to being retired, but yet government employees get full retirement, cost of living benefits, great health insurance, great plans, and they get this soft landing. And it's not part of their stated compensation. So when you hear about public school teachers and they get paid so little, we did a study years ago, and the question was, if you're going to pay somebody up front for what it is that they're going to get guaranteed as a retirement, if you're going to buy this para-retirement in a guaranteed pension, how much more would you have to pay for them up front?
Yeah.
And it turned out you needed to pay them about 29% more.
Right.
So so whatever salary you see for a teacher, add almost 30% more to that salary. That is closer to their true salary for their 9 months of work. It's pretty impressive. So I find there to be a real equity issue with para.
Well, and we've seen the defined benefit pensions, which is what we're talking about here, as you well know, have been going away for some time in the private sector, and they're not a lot of them left. So in order to be fair, we do need to look at someone's total income over a lifetime in order to have an accurate comparison. Right. One of the big challenges that we face with para and that so many of the state pension funds face around the country is the fact that, and this is a high-class problem to have, but that people are living longer, is the actuarial assumptions that underlie this. Mostly how long are people going to live, but there are other factors, how many new people are going to sign up, at what age are they going to retire, and so forth. We did, as you're probably aware, when I was in the legislature, some pretty significant reforms to para in 2018. And just to back up, what precipitated that was the fact that para had really reached the edge of a cliff in that its unfunded liabilities were exceeding $50 billion, and the funded ratio was down below or close to 50%. And what we saw all of a sudden, it's like the character in the old Hemingway novel that gets asked, how did you go bankrupt? And he says, well, slowly at first, then all of a sudden, you know the story. And so what we encountered in 2018 was really an edge of the cliff, which would have been a terrible thing for us to fall off of for para members, for taxpayers, and for the state. The state's credit rating was in jeopardy. So there was a bipartisan group of legislators that got together, faced with this really serious problem, and put together a pretty extensive set of reforms that I'm happy to go through in some detail. There is a lot of detail associated with them, but they put para on, I think, what we could best call a much better trajectory. It's not that we're out of the woods here. but we're on a better path than we were.
And even there, and I remember that,
Yeah.
but still taxpayers had to put money into this as
Yes,
well.
yes,
From
they
my
did.
point of view,
Yep.
during that, I think, wasn't it Senate Bill 200?
Senate Bill 200 in 2018, that's correct.
I was observing that going, why am I paying anything towards this for this lavish benefit? It all should come from the pensioners' point of view. They're the ones having this lavish, unfunded benefit that can't happen. I had buddies who were in the union at United Airlines.
Yep.
United went bankrupt. The guy's pension got cut in half. And then that pension got cut in half again because it was a private pension. That's what happened. And as a retiree, he had 25% of what he was promised.
Yep.
But because these guys are government employees, they have no such worry. There's something, I think, ethically wrong about that.
Well, and there's some larger questions that sort of go outside of the management of para there. One thing I will say is the way we tried to structure those reforms was so that we left everybody, probably every group that was involved was at least a little bit angry with the result, which means in an ugly situation like we were in, we probably got it about right. There were additional contributions that had to come in from existing members who were still working. There were additional contributions that came in from employers, think taxpayers, school districts, the state, and so forth. Let's be clear what we're
Still right
talking
over here.
about here. That's right. That is still taxpayers. There were also some pretty significant sacrifices made by retirees in the form of COLA payments, cost of living adjustments that got ratcheted downward. And then there was, as you're probably familiar with, the obligation of the state legislature to contribute $225 million a year until we were back at our fully funded status. And about taxpayers, right. 100%. Let's be clear about that. So there's plenty of reason for a lot of folks involved in this to be upset with the result. But again, we were dealing with there are very few times in the legislature when you have sort of the metaphor of the patient bleeding out on the table. That is what we had there. It was the only time I saw that I can remember when then Governor Hickenlooper actually came up to the second floor and went into the House chamber and was lobbying individual members on supporting the reform because the alternative was frankly so bad for the state. It was not a position. It was not a position we wanted to be in.
And again, I want to move forward to
sure.
where you're going now. But was there any talk of raising the age? Because when I look at Social Security, the age of Social Security is going to keep going up. Yeah. And it seems to me, and it's something we've looked at, is something in Colorado that says government employees shouldn't be able to get para benefits until regular citizens get their Social Security benefits.
And in fact, the age for people, and there's a lot of nuance to this that I'm sort of washing over here, but the ages for new members was actually raised, and how much depends on which division you were in. State patrol members have one age. School members would have school division members would have another, but the ages were
Social Security
raised.
recipients all have one age.
Understand, but those ages
basically we need
were
a better
raised.
union.
the taxpayers union. Understand.
All right, so you were very involved with that. What has that got to do with you being a treasurer, assuming you're successful this fall?
Well, again, the treasurer has a seat on that board. Right. So the input there.
Is that the most important thing you would, as a treasurer, would be doing?
I think there are two. The Treasury does a lot of different things, which we could tick through, and a lot of them I would put in the category of very important, but still somewhat ministerial. And there is a staff there that I have a lot of regard for. The reason I think it's an elected office has to do with one word, and that's leadership. And the two places where leadership is, actually I'll make it three, but the places where leadership is most important are, first of all, in the input on that para board, because so much is involved and there's some really important decisions that are going to be made to keep us on that trajectory. Number two is oversight of a couple of the programs that more recently the Treasury Department has been put in charge of. And without getting into a lot of detail on those, I would say it is very important to be very clear-eyed about what those programs are accomplishing and can accomplish, and very candid with the public about what they are accomplishing for us. The third thing, and where leadership I think is very important, is how we actually use the bully pulpit of the office to weigh in on economic issues. And I think, and one of the real reasons I'm running is, I think we need to restore some balance to our statewide leadership on economic issues. We've had single party control of the state for a number of years, and frankly the state's become a very, very expensive place to live. And part of that is a result of policies that one party has pushed through that have driven up costs in a whole slew of ways that I think you well understand. And I want to be a voice for more restraint. And I'll give you one example. You know, I have always been a very strong supporter of our right to vote on tax increases and to vote on tax refunds. The current occupant of the Treasurer's office, who I serve within the legislature, have no personal animosity towards, but when he was the Treasurer, using the power and influence of that office in 2019, he was a big supporter of Proposition CC, which, as you well know, would have gotten rid of our taxpayer refunds, not just then, but forever. And we are talking billions of dollars that taxpayers would not have received. And of course, now...
yeah, if I can make the quick,
yeah, sure,
the quick
do.
Obvious detour on that.
Please
which is
do.
How remarkable it is that every Democrat who seems to be running for re-election is taking credit for these taxpayer refunds, even though they all tried to take them away forever.
Right.
From the governor to so many different state legislators, to the person you're trying to unseat, who, if they had their way back in 2019, would have taken away our tax refunds forever.
Forever.
There'd be none of them ever again, time immemorial. But now they're giving us some of our own money back because they care about the affordability. I find it so, not only just disingenuous, but duplicitous and just frankly repugnant.
Well, it is. You know, hypocrisy is not unknown to politics. But this is kind of next level
but people
stuff.
ought to know. And what's so frustrating for me, and maybe I get this, the leadership from the governor on down, because I believe the governor sets a tone for the entire one-party system that we have here in Colorado. Right. The courts are run by Democrats, the legislature is run by Democrats, his administration is run by Democrats, but we used to have Democrats that took responsibility for the things they did. I'm thinking about guys like Roy Romer and Dick Lamb, the guys I grew up with, and they would make tough calls, things that people really hated. And they would say, this is why I'm making that call. And they would say things like, yeah, I disagreed with this, but the voters disagreed with me.
Right.
And you know, for the governor to say, I wanted to take away your Tabor refunds, voters said no, here's why these checks are coming out. They're not coming from me, they're coming from Tabor because you guys overrid me. That would have been fine. Or the more recent thing of the ozone issue on the EPA. Next couple of years, our gas prices will surge by 30 to 50 cents because Polis, has rescinded Hickenlooper's application for a waiver on ozone, which, by the way, is what happens all the time. It's an easy thing, but he wrote this letter threatening the EPA, saying, you know, I fully oppose forcing us to reformulate our gasoline. It's too expensive. It's like, wait a second. You fully oppose what you are solely responsible for doing? A leader steps up and says, yes, I rescinded that order, which I knew full well was going to cost us another 50 cents a gallon in gasoline, but I believe that's important for us because of this. That's leadership. And that void of it is now trickling through, cascading through government, right down to the man you're trying to unseat, saying, you know, we want to help you with these refunds that I never wanted to give you in the first place. And I think people ought to know that because there are tough times ahead. I think there's still going to be lots of tough times. And our leaders need to be people, even if we disagree with, that we know that they're telling us the truth, more now than ever before. And I just don't feel it.
Well, it's a very important point, and you know, with respect to the EPA issue and the additives that would drive up the price, what I find interesting is that now we are seeing the argument on behalf of the governor and others essentially saying and using these words that we need to be doing a cost-benefit analysis of the cost of these regulations. And frankly, I agree. But
Yes, he should have done that in 2019
And this
when he
is-
made this call.
well, that is exactly the point. And that is one of the ways that I think I can lead by bringing the bully pulpit of this office to bear, is to advocate for cost-benefit analysis of the major economic regulations that we do, and the rules that are actually formulated under this. And we just don't do that.
There's a reason the guys who built the state capitol put the treasurer's office right across the hall from the governor's office. There is a symbolic check and balance there, in that upstairs, you know, the legislature decides where all the money goes. Downstairs, the treasurer makes sure that it's all copacetic, and when the governor does something, the treasurer gets to say, no, that's not the way it is. And I think we've really missed that.
I think the balance is missing. You know, when I was in the legislature, for example, I was in the House, and Democrats controlled the House. So if you wanted to get anything out of there, you had to figure out how to work together with some folks on the other side of the aisle. And it was, frankly, a very good discipline, even if it was very frustrating at sometimes. But then you also had Republicans who controlled the state Senate by one vote. They didn't always vote together, but there was a balance there, and there was a balance by having the president of the Senate be from a different party than the Speaker of the House. And I do think we miss that. I do think we miss that balance. And you know, frankly, my whole record, the things that I'm most proud of, are having, I think, been fiscally very responsible, but at the same time having found ways to work across the aisle to get stuff done. I mean, we got school equity for school funding done, first in the nation legislation done, which I'm very proud of. We got the Paris stuff done. We got some healthcare transparency to go after predatory billing practices. All those things required working together. And I'll work with anybody. I'd much rather solve problems than fight. But we're not going to do that, and we're not going to have the compromise if we don't have some balance in a representation.
Yeah, I think we were better off. I remember the days when Bill Owens was state treasurer.
Yep.
Roy Romer was our governor. They did not see eye to eye on much of anything, but there was a really good check and balance there of, I would say, the very public discourse that they would have on these issues.
Sure.
And they would both, in their own way, get their points across. I saw the same thing with Walker Stapleton and Hickenlooper.
Yep.
You know, that we saw that Walker Stapleton was saying, this para fund is not going to last. This, you know, alleged rate of return of 8% rate of return that our calculations are based on is not happening in the real world. This is fantasy. You know, and so we're missing that today. We're missing that today because they're all of one party, and so there's not that challenging. And I think voters, reporters, the media, we are all missing that very important, healthy conflict that's supposed to happen inside representative democracy.
Yeah, I would agree, and as long as it's done in a respectful way and we don't spend all our time sort of hurling verbal grenades at each other, I think it yields something that's very positive for the state, and it just isn't there right now. And you know, you can look at, for example, the Green Building Code legislation that was passed this year. You know, and I never question motives. Okay.
So, I do.
So you can do that, but I'm not questioning motives. But we have to look at what it costs, and we've seen independent analysis come back on that says, look, you know, that's going to drive up the price of an average house by $12,000 to $13,000 and a lot more in some places. And so we are.
Well, what people are saying is the idea of electrification, which is going to be a lot more than that. The idea that people won't be able to have a gas stove, or a gas heater, or a gas water heater. This is insanity.
Well, and what do you know? At what point have you transitioned from seeking a reasonable balance to pursuing an ideological agenda? And that's where I think having some balance in your representation brings you balance in decision
Let
making.
me run out of time real fast. Why do you want this job? I mean, it seems to me you could, do pretty well as a greeter at Walmart. There are a lot of things you could be doing. Why would you want to be doing this?
I like public service. I get a feeling of great satisfaction from doing it, whether it was in the military or in the legislature. I find the issues actually interesting, and I think I have enough of a background in it to make a difference.
Do you really suck at everything else that this is the only job you can do? Is that the case here?
I'm just enough of a nerd to find this stuff interesting. For the last 3 years, I've actually sat on this oversight committee that oversees para. So have been pretty immersed in those issues that, as we said, is the intersection of boring.
It's a pretty awful bug to get. I know what it is when you find yourself really loving a particular policy issue,
yes,
and nobody else quite gets it. It's bad.
But I find it really interesting, and it's very important. And I want to be what I hope will be a thoughtful voice on bigger economic policies.
Other treasurers have used this as a stepping stone to try to become governor. Is that what this is about?
No, if I were interested in something else, I'd be running for something else.
Does that mean you're not going to run for governor?
No, I will not. I will let you know if I ever decide to do something else, but I'm very, very committed to doing this job. And I think if you look at my background and the amount of time that I spent particularly focusing on para, that this is what I want to do and this is where I want to be.
Any little dark secrets you want to tell me?
No.
Because we're going to find out about
the drunk. It's just the two of us here, right?
What about the drunk driving accident where you wiped out a whole family? You don't want to tell us about that?
I think I've been pretty well vetted at this point. It's been a number of races.
Think so?
I think they've probably they've looked pretty hard.
Oh, they can always find something else. What's been the biggest surprise so far campaigning? Don't give me the usual, oh, it's been so fun to meet my neighbors and talk about the issues. Come on, what sucks about campaigning?
It's a lot. You're sleep deprived and you're traveling a lot. Yeah. But I'll tell you what I have been surprised by, although now that I think about it, it makes sense, is you hear very similar things from small business people when you go all over the state and ask them what the biggest challenges they are facing are.
What are they?
And the two biggest ones are that their input costs are going up way faster than they can possibly pass on. It's a huge problem for them, and particularly in the rural areas, but not just in the rural areas. And the second thing is, it's very, very hard for them to find people to work, and that's a real challenge. I was talking with one gent in the valley who is involved in food distribution. And he said they were having such trouble finding people to work that they actually spent millions of dollars on automation that they did not want to spend. But he said now, when folks are coming back and looking for those jobs, he said they won't be there. And that is a very, very common theme when you talk to folks, particularly on the small business side.
I hear there's some technology about automating treasurer that we can't afford it. No quality people want to have the job, so you'll be okay now, but in a couple of years.
I'll be redundant.
It'll be robotic.
There'll be a machine there.
Hey, best of luck. Really appreciate spending some time.
Thanks very much, John. Appreciate your time.
If you enjoyed that conversation, by all means, click one of these other great programs. We have the best conversations with the most fascinating Coloradans. And subscribe to our channel. Just click down below and hit that little bell button too. You don't want to miss a single show.